If I'd known in 2012 what I know now, would I have transitioned? No, I wouldn't have done. Autogynephilic males such as me are sexually attracted to our own bodies. That leads to a circle that can't be squared. This idea of gender identity, there's no proof for it. Men will risk everything on this, their careers, their families, their livelihoods on this. This is just a different aspect of human sexuality. I'm certainly not engaged in some sort of 24/7 sexual fetish. Goodness gracious, I'd be exhausted.
Your experience as a child, they are very eager to say she's lying.
Try and use actual birth sex pronouns. It goes against our common sense and our perceptions.
If I were to speak about you, I very naturally say she.
Even if we're clocked to be male, if the signals keep pushing it that way, people's instincts override that, or they do in real life. This is the key to understanding why we are in the mess that we actually are. The problem is that if women say yes to me, then it's more difficult for them to say yes to the next who may be a threat. It's the male sex drive that pushes people into transition. I think it is. I don't think this is going away, but you say things that you think people need to hear. It doesn't necessarily lead to popularity.
Debbie Hayton, welcome to the Jack.Jewell podcast. I am very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, Jack.
No problem. Really looking forward to this conversation. So, Debbie Hayton, you are the author of the recent book that came out, Transexual Apostate, My Journey Back to Reality. And I have actually read this book. I sort of went between the audiobook and the Kindle version, so I had the pleasure of hearing your narration as well. And I thought it was great. I've been following your work for quite a while, I suppose. And I really like the sorts of ideas you put out there and how you'll get a lot of stick from both sides, right? Even though you're speaking to what you know to be true. So I'd love to hear your, I guess, for any viewers or listeners who don't know who you are, maybe a brief background and then some background on the book and what led you to writing that.
Okay, well, my background is I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching for nearly 30 years now. I transitioned in 2012. So after I've been a teacher for something like 17 years, I then transitioned, carrying on working in schools. And my aim at the time was to stay out of the press. It was to keep my job and stay out of the press. That was the aim. And I sort of did that for about 4 or 5 years. But what I noticed from about 2015 onwards was a real change in the way that the narrative was being delivered. So instead of being talking about transsexuals who were trying to reintegrate into society, just get on with our jobs, get on with our lives without causing a fuss, without making transsexualism an issue, suddenly that was changed to it almost seemed to me as transgender people demanding that society change for them, which was not what I went in for. Around that time, there was then the push for self-ID, so that everybody could, everybody could be legally recognised as the gender that they identified with, which sounds wonderful and liberal and progressive. But I just felt that if you remove all the safeguards, remove all the checks, all of the balances, then this is not going to end well. And I figured that we'd end up with people taking advantage of the situation, people using it for all sorts of motives that were never imagined in the outset, and the sort of atrocities and the sort of absurd situations I imagined came to pass. We've had male rapists in female prisons. We've had male people winning women's sporting events, pushing women further down the line, and there's been an unspeakable impact on children for the last few years. So I around 2016, I saw that and I started campaigning, and I thought somebody's got to open their mouth on this, and few people were at the time. And those of us who were opening our mouths did feel small in number, very much on the edge, and not really getting heard. I think at the time in 2016, if you talked to us, I think many of us were thinking this will end in valiant defeat. We're working with a juggernaut here, but at least we've tried. And now we look at this, especially in the UK, and think, well, yes, this is now big news. We have politicians harangued when they can't define what a woman is and what a man is. That wasn't happening before. The Cass report is just huge in how that's likely to protect children, because it just really makes the medical profession think carefully about what they've been doing, because I don't think they were thinking before. So that was a huge success. I just don't think people back in 2016, 2017, I just don't think that we thought that was going to happen. So that has happened, and it's a much better place to be in. But I've always been somebody who says what I think, and I'll say what I think, even if the crowd disagree with me. And that's what was certainly happening in 2017, and it's still happening today. So it's just this is me.
Nice. Well, you've obviously condensed maybe 8 years there down into a brief paragraph, and you've done so much, which you describe in your book, and you're on no end of podcasts, and see you on GB News a lot as well. I know that you write articles too. So obviously your book came out several months ago, and what was the inspiration specifically behind that book, and what kind of message did you want to convey?
Well, it's part memoir and part an explanation of what I think is going on there. I wanted to tell my story, and a publisher came to me and asked me if I was interested in writing a book. And I said, funny you should say that, because I first tried to pitch a book in 2017, and nobody was interested, or people were interested, but when they looked at my ideas and what I was saying, then suddenly they backed off. So a publisher came to me in 2020, the end of 2021, actually, and the end of 2022, and said, "Would you be interested in writing a book?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I tried to do two things. I tried to tell my story, and it's there, warts and all, really, including how 10 years ago when I 12 years ago when I transitioned, I thought I was some kind of woman. I was as bought into this idea that trans women are women as anybody is. So I've admitted that. I've explained that. I explained why I thought it, and I've also tried to describe the impact on me of saying what I think. I've been hounded. I've been harassed. I've been cancelled. And I wanted to tell those stories. I think it's quite remarkable, actually, about how people react to ideas that they don't like. Because I quite like ideas, and I quite like debating them. And if somebody's got ideas different to me, I like to talk to them. It's really interesting, is that? But clearly, when you have ideas that no, trans women are not women, and transsexualism is rooted in our sexuality rather than gender, and trying to explain why that's the case, then that creates a brand new situation which I've been suffering. So I tried to describe that experience, but in the middle of the book, there's two key chapters when I'm trying to explain why some people, at least, are transsexual. Because I don't think it helps to say there are trans people and all trans people are the same. We're not. We're a group of people with all perhaps with the urge to present as the opposite sex. So we're perceived to be the opposite sex. That's perhaps what unites us. But the reasons for that don't need to be the same. The reasons for that can be disparate. So in the middle of the book, I tried to explain that from my perspective, just exactly what's going on.
Yes, for sure. And I think your book is a great mix to me while reading it of, like you said, your memoir dating back to your childhood, the topic of autogynephilia, which I'd really like to go through. And then you also touch on a lot of interesting legislative stuff in terms of the history. So I definitely learned a lot there. So yeah, you obviously mentioned that there's different motivations to transition, and I have covered autogynephilia quite a bit on my channel, so my listeners are probably familiar. So there's some specific things I'd love to dig into that, I suppose. But I suppose for anyone who does not know what that is, doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, could you define it, and then we'll go into it?
Well, the definition which the man Ray Blanchard, who coined the term, came up with was a male's propensity to be sexually attracted to the thought of himself as female. And that contrasts with other heterosexual men who are sexually attracted to the thought of other people as female. That's all it is. So heterosexual men are what fires them up is that image of the female person in other people. So heterosexual men can be are attracted to women who are female. They can be attracted to all sorts of other things. Can heterosexual men as well, and images as well. Heterosexual men do not need actual female body in front of them to be sexually aroused. Images will do it. Audio will do it. Even line drawings will do it, for goodness sake. So autogynephilic males such as me are sexually attracted to our own bodies, and that leads to a circle that can't be squared, because we are heterosexual, so we're attracted to the female form, but because the focus is our own bodies are lamentably male. So suddenly there's that conflict which can't easily be resolved. You're sexually attracted to this body, but this body is the wrong sex. And it's out of that which comes the urge to transition this body to be a body which is more, more pleasing to us. So we're more satisfied with it and we're content with it. In the same way, one analogy I've used before is heterosexual men who may encourage their partners to wear lots of makeup because they find that attractive. They may encourage their partners to wear sexy clothes because that's attractive to them. So that's what heterosexual men do. But when the focus is our own body, then we've got the impulse is to do that to our own bodies. And this gets really interesting because you can see the result of that in the way that middle-aged men transition and what they do with those bodies. But what's interesting is you don't have the female person in there who acts as a bit of a brake on all these fantasies and says, "I'm not doing that, and I'm certainly not wearing that." So suddenly, without that break in the system, or to use a physics analogy, if the male if male sexuality is the cell or the power supply in an electrical circuit, then the female response is the load in the circuit. You just take that out. So suddenly this power supply short circuits with spectacular results at times. And it's interesting, I think, because when you look at heterosexual men, you can't necessarily see their fantasies, and what they are really fantasizing can always be plausibly denied. Whereas in the case of autogynephilic males, because their bodies are the canvas for those fantasies, you can see. And this is interesting. I think autogynephilia, in a way, is a window into male sexuality in that way, in that suddenly you can actually see what autogynephiles do, what many other men may only be thinking, and can plausibly deny.
Very well described, and I enjoyed the sort of science references, probably motivated by your background. And yes, I think it's amusing to me how we hear the narrative of, born in the wrong body, or I always had the gender identity of a woman. But when we're talking in the context of, I suppose, both types of transsexual males, the motivation actually comes from a very male phenomenon. Yeah. Right?
Well, it is. And you've got to ask yourself, why do middle-aged men suddenly decide to transition at the same age that other middle-aged heterosexual men might have extramarital affairs, incidentally? There's a lot of parallels, and there's an analogy there. So why do it? This idea of gender identity is a hypothesis that has been put forward without any proof or there's no proof for it. It can't be falsified. People just say, "I've got a gender identity," and you say, "What is that?" I used to think I had a gender identity, so I can empathize to some extent. But if gender identity doesn't need to exist, and we can't actually describe what it is beyond some sort of inner feeling, then is it better to try and explain what's actually happening without it? And I think it is. And we look at middle-aged men transitioning, as I said, at the same age that other men might have extramarital affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, there is such a huge, powerful driver that men will risk everything on this. They'll risk their careers, they'll risk their families, they'll risk their livelihoods on this.
Mm-hmm.
And what's behind extramarital affairs, of course, is the male sex drive. And the same level of intensity and the same level of focus comes out in midlife transition. And my argument is the male sex drive is behind this as well.
Mm-hmm. I enjoy how you can talk about it from a sort of neutral ground, right? Because autogynephilia is a very pesky topic to discuss, and I get a lot of pushback too from both sides, because while the trans activists like to deny that it exists entirely, then there are a certain side on the other group of people who want to paint it out to merely being a fetish without any further complexities, I suppose, and that if you're in the company of an autogynephilic male, even if you're, just going for a walk by the river, nothing sexual, then you're being coerced into a sex act. So some of them will say that. I'd love to know your opinion on that and how we can explain how autogynephilia may be more complex than simply just saying, oh, it's a kink, it's a fetish.
Well, it's male sexuality, and it's male sexuality which is directed inwards to our own bodies. And to say that I'm engaged in some sort of sexual fantasy all the time is nonsense. I haven't got the energy for that, and no more so than other men. But I think if you look at an autogynephilic male such as me, who has changed my body into something which is more pleasing to me, it's a very personal thing, is what I've done really, more pleasing to me. That's one thing, but other heterosexual men may be painting those ideas onto your body, and just because you can't see what's actually happening, and as I said, it can be plausibly denied, doesn't mean to say that it's not happening. And I would argue that I'm no more engaging in a fetish when I go to work with a T-shirt which was marketed at women, which I usually do, and my hair long, perhaps some makeup. I'm no more engaged in a fetish then than other men are when they see a woman who's attracted. They're not necessarily when they see a woman who's attracted to them. That's an external focus of their sexuality, and that's what we do as human beings. And at the same time, we try to make ourselves attractive to other people. And this is the normal interaction between adults. We're not really supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to talk about why people do this. I think it's a game where you're not supposed to mention the rules, but the rules definitely exist. But we notice it when some males like to make themselves attractive in the same way that women try to make themselves attractive. It's just that the focus is different. So I try to make myself attractive because in one way, other men may make themselves attractive in other ways, and women may make themselves attractive in other ways. This is human sexuality, and we're all doing this. It's part of life. It's part of who we are. And autogynephilia is just part of that. It's nothing. It's not in my view, it's not something which is different, which needs to be kept over there because it's somehow wrong, deviant, or some nasty fetish which is negative. This is just a different aspect of human sexuality.
Mm-hmm. My perception of that at the moment, so because I'm gay, I've obviously had to think about my sexuality a lot as well, and then when I think in the context of autogynephilia, and there will be a lot of gay men who hate the fact that I could compare the two, but we're talking about a male sexuality which is directed towards something. So mine is externally towards men, right? And if I'm out with my boyfriend throughout the day, like we hold hands, we might feel affection for each other, even kiss in public. I do those things without thinking, and I don't feel like I'm coercing people around me into a sex act, if you know what I mean. So I kind of perceive it that way, in that our sexuality, the word sexuality has a stigma against it, right? But I think what I've come to understand is sexuality and our sexual orientation sort of permeates everything we do day to day, because we're mammals. We have an evolutionary strategy. For some reason, our sexualities got miswired somehow in terms of evolving. But I really do sort of see it that way. And I think I'd love to know your opinion on this, because autogynephilia obviously has a very bad perception among certain crowds, and some people find it very uncomfortable to think about. I think what doesn't help that is having some bad apples actually do things which are very inappropriate. And I'm wondering, if you're autogynephilic, is there a bigger chance that you may be one of those kind of people, or is it just because these are men? Because I suppose in gay men, you'll get cases of gay men doing very inappropriate things in a nightclub or maybe in a bathroom with another man. So I think maybe that's what people are missing slightly. What do you think?
Well, I think there's two things to picking up on what you said there, Jack. First of all, what is sexuality? There's two sides to it. There's our sexual orientation, how we're attracted to other people. That's one side of it. But the other side is how we make ourselves attractive to other people, and we do that as human beings, as adults. We do that so that we'll brush our hair, we'll put some makeup on, we'll wear clothes which we think will attract other people. Except we probably don't think that. We'll probably just think these are clothes that make us feel comfortable. We're comfortable wearing these clothes. These clothes make me feel happy about myself. Now, from an evolutionary strand, there's probably something there in that we wear clothes and we present ourselves so we feel comfortable in ourselves. But at the same time, we're making ourselves attractive to others. This is how socially, we're social beings. And this is how we relate to other people. So I don't think I'm engaging any more in a sex act with anybody else than a man who carefully chooses, a tie that contrasts with his jacket in the morning, combs his hair, trims his mustache to try and make him feel confident and attractive, and women who will make themselves attractive in a different way. But just like there's two types of sexual orientation, you can be attracted to the female sex or you can be attracted to the male sex, then there's two ways of making ourselves attractive. There's one way that males do it, and there's one way that females do it. Now, homosexuality fits into that, I think, in that your sexual orientation is to the other sex, to most men. So it's the same sex that women are attracted to. So that's one side of it. Autogynephilia looks at the other side of sexual attraction, where I make myself, I present myself in the same way that women do. So again, that's the other crossover, and you can argue why on earth did evolution leave us with this as either? We can talk about homosexuality and we can talk about autogynephilia, and neither really seem to be good from an evolutionary perspective. But what's interesting is, can we discuss these things? Because we may learn more about the human condition. We may learn more about ourselves, how we interact, and human society itself by exploring these ideas, rather than just folding our arms and saying, this is wrong, I don't like this. We need to stop this, which I think is not the way of understanding ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. The truth needs to come out. And I suppose there's less of a debate over homosexuality because we haven't seen this phenomenon of transsexualism, I suppose, sort of be born out of what is autogynephilia, and the mass public largely not having a clue what that thing is. For me, I just couldn't believe it once I learned all about it. I was thinking, how is this not something people talk about at all? But instead we have this whole trans narrative that goes with it. And something I find interesting too is, so if I think of myself again and my homosexuality, looking back to my childhood, there were lots of signs of it, which I didn't know at the time. Now, I've seen very harsh feminists, or I suppose there's certain people who'd label them as TERFs, even though I like don't like to use that word, who have seen you write about your experience as a child and feelings you had, and they are very eager to say she's lying about that, or Debbie Hayton is lying about that, in order to soften what is a fetish. But I'd love to know sort of a bit more about that, and whether you think autogynephilia can be present from a very young age. Because another narrative I hear a lot is, oh, it only comes on puberty, and that's when it develops. But it seems like perhaps that's not the case.
Well, my experience is as early as I can remember. I haven't made those stories in the book I talk about from when I'm 2 or 3 years old. I haven't made those up. And I think if I was going to make stories up, they would be different. I wouldn't make that up. So I'm reporting my own experience from a very young age. I think this is part of the human condition. It's part of who we are. I've talked to gay friends of mine who will say, they had an idea that there was something different about them when they were growing up, so that when they went through puberty, it wasn't as if suddenly they turned gay at puberty. That didn't happen. It was just their own character, their own personality developed at puberty, so that just as male sexuality develops at puberty, theirs developed in a different way at puberty. But it was still the same human being, and it was still the same person. They didn't turn into somebody else at puberty.
Yeah.
And that was my experience as well. So growing up, I knew there was something different. I knew it was something to be deeply ashamed of. I'm not sure where that came from, actually. But I knew this was something not to talk about, and to be really to keep down, and not to talk about. But it was something which I could explore in my mind. I used to. I'd focused on waking up the next morning as a girl. That would have solved all my problems as a 9-year-old.
Yeah,
and I'd worked that out.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't something which drove me to the extent of I guess cross-dressing and actually putting those fantasies into reality, because like other 9-year-old boys, I hadn't yet reached puberty, and it was at puberty where I didn't turn into somebody different. The autogynephilia didn't suddenly appear, but because of the way the puberty increases the testosterone that runs through your body, and suddenly your sexuality becomes something which is rather harder to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens at puberty. Now, the idea that autogynephilia is something which is caused by the wrong sort of porn, which it's ludicrous. People have said the same thing about gay men. It's the wrong sort of porn that's turned people gay, which is rubbish. I guess porn, for example, doesn't create sexuality. More, it might reveal them, or it might because a gay man will be attracted to certain genres. For me, it was the fantasy world of people suddenly waking up as the other sex. That was what interested me. I thought I was the only person actually around. I thought it was just me.
Yeah.
Or my second hypothesis was that all of the boys in my class were struggling with exactly the same thoughts,
Right.
and nobody ever dare say it. The fact that about 3%, because that's probably the number, 1 to 3% of males are, as in some degree attracted to their own body as well as other women's bodies, just totally passed me by.
Mm-hmm.
Really did.
Mm-hmm. I've also heard the argument about porn. I think I'm a big fan of Helen Joyce, and I know that she's talked about it before. I'm not too sure where she stands on it, because it seems like some people think that just your average heterosexual boy, when exposed to this, can then suddenly want to transition. I think what's funny to me is that you have a lot of these women who I really respect and have done so much great work, but I suppose there's more females talking about it than males, and what's lacking is a deeper understanding of male sexuality. And I understand why some people don't want to go there. They don't see it as relevant, and that's totally fine too. But you talk about this 3%, and sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think it is, as men, we don't want to talk about our sexuality, and heterosexual men specifically. So, gay men might be more open to discussing it, but heterosexual men don't.
Yeah, yeah.
So suddenly it's something that stares down. Before, you talked about the bad apples and the bad examples of
Oh
autogynephilia.
yeah.
And I just want to pick up on that, because I think there's two issues to see there. One that yes, I think you look at autogynephilic men who paint their fantasies on their own bodies, and I just wonder what the whole what the whole population of heterosexual men are actually thinking, and what their fantasies are like, because we don't talk about it, and and we're there's a social stigma about talking about it. Might even be an evolved instinct that we don't talk about it. I don't know. But in the case of autogynephiles, you actually see those fantasies painted on the bodies. Whether that's a fair cross section of men, I don't know. I suspect it is more extreme, and I think we come back to the fact that there is there's no load in the circuit.
Right.
So the smallest fantasy can sometimes run riot, and you get left with those. You get those ridiculous vignettes of middle-aged men in miniskirts going down to Tesco's at 8 o'clock in the morning and prancing around in high heels, and you just think, this is absolutely ridiculous. But in the normal situation, a middle-aged man might think that. It might be nice to see that, but it's one of those fantasies that can never come to fruition until you're the actual model for that fantasy, and you don't have anybody to say, actually, this isn't a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could also see why transsexualism can be appealing, because there's a certain classiness that comes with fully transitioning, I suppose, than a male who still has full body hair wearing, a push-up bra and a dress. I suppose that version may look slightly more clownish, for want of a better term, than a fully transitioned male. Do you think that that's part of it?
Well, I go back to when I transitioned. There's always been that view of, there are transsexuals who go through social, medical, and surgical transition, and then there are transvestites, and who are in this for a sexual thrill. And there has been, and I suspect there still is, this idea that the two groups are separate, and one group may be seen to be looking down on another. There's the transmedicalists, as are sometimes sometimes called, looking down in the group. But in reality, I'm not necessarily sure that there is. There's the old joke, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the book or not, that what's the difference between a transvestite and a transsexual? And the answer is about 5 years. But but that aside, and that has come from the trans community itself. But that aside, I think it comes down to how we relate to other people as human beings. And we've talked quite a lot about autogynephilia, which is chapter 4 in my book. I think chapter 5, which is about perception, is equally important, and I like that chapter as well, because a lot of those ideas are new.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about perception, it's how we perceive other people.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience and talking to other people, their experiences, as human beings, we perceive the difference between male and female. We're very good at it. When we see other people, we want to know, is this a man or a woman? We look at children, is this a boy or a girl? And we're not happy until we've actually worked that out. We may sometimes get it wrong, but we'll want to decide that. This is really important to us. And you can see how in our evolutionary history, this is kind of important. So when a woman sees somebody at a distance, she needs to know, is this a man or a woman? Is this a potential threat or not? As men, we like to see whether is this other person a man or a woman? But that is a binary, and that's a psychological binary in how we perceive other people. So when we come back to the transvestites, this sort of blur this. This is a man who is trying to present as a woman, because under the surface, under the clothing, under the makeup, under the wig, this is clearly a man.
Mm-hmm.
So we perceive transvestites in one way. A transsexual who has gone through, as I say, through social transition, medical transitions, so their hormone levels are in the same region as the opposite sex, and surgical transition, that's different. And before about 5-6 years ago, those people were routinely treated by virtually everybody as the opposite sex, because it was sort of easier.
Yeah.
If this person gave off all the signals of being a woman, looked like a woman, and when they stripped off, looked even more like a woman than a man, it was just absurd to treat this person as a man. So transsexuals were treated as the opposite sex and blended into society as the opposite sex, and did their bit. And they occupied a different part of other people's perception, because they sort of fitted in.
Yeah.
They didn't cause that double think in people's heads. It was saying, oh yeah, okay. Even if they knew you were a male transsexual, they'd all the circuitry said, oh, just treat this person as a woman. It's easier. So that's where we've come in from, and I've talked quite a lot about this in chapter 5.
Yeah. I think it's all very interesting, and on that topic is pronouns, right? And you talk, and tell me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, but my understanding, I think something you say is, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? And we generally use pronouns to describe people the way we perceive them. Now we have one side, the trans activists, trying to get us to say they, them, when, that's never really a natural impulse, among other neo-pronouns, which get more and more ridiculous. And then we have some of the other side who vehemently want to call every trans woman he, him, every trans man she, her. And while I respect everyone's right to an opinion, and I would never say you shouldn't do that, it's not nice or whatever, for me, I suppose it's easiest, it's kind of two-pronged for me. One is, what do I more naturally go to do? And then the second one is, normally, are they a respectful person who is sort of grounded in reality? I don't really have as many qualms about calling Leah Thomas he, him, because of everything Leah's done. But I suppose for someone like yourself, if I were to speak about you, I very naturally say she. And for me, I don't really want the mental effort of having to remember, I need to label this person he because they've sold us this lie. Now, that's just where I sit, but some people really don't like that.
Well, pronouns should be there to describe and be easy for us, not to actually create their own issues. So from one side of the debate, you've got the transactive side of the debate that says, as soon as somebody's declared themselves to be a woman, then you need to use she, her pronouns, and anything else is bigotry. And now they talk to other people in the room will look at this, and this is hard work, because this person looks like a man, sounds like a man, moves around like a man, and just emits man. So trying to use female pronouns it's absurd.
Yeah.
On the other side, it's when somebody has transitioned and they're in a room of people, to use the sex pronouns also leads to absurdities of a different kind. So away from social media, because I think without social media and without the internet, we would not be discussing this.
Yeah.
I just don't think this would ever become an issue. Away from social media, if I'm, say, in the staff room at school, and a visitor comes in and says, who doesn't know me, and says, I'm looking for Debbie Hayton because I've got this package to give to them, or whatever. And one of my colleagues says, oh, Debbie, he's the is the person sat on the chair by the bookcase, they're going to say who. And it's hard work. So you would use the pronouns which make life easy for yourself in that situation. So in real life, most people use she, her pronouns because it's intelligible,
Yeah.
it's easy, and it's readily understood by everybody who they're talking about. To try and use actual both sex pronouns is it's just hard work, and it goes against our common sense and our perceptions. I think it was, and I may have this wrong, but I think it was Ben Shapiro who was interviewing Blair White.
Yeah.
Now, Ben's views are quite hardline on this. You know, Ben is a conservative commentator who has no time for gender identity, and in his view, Blair White is a man who was just presents in a different way to other men. But it was really difficult for Ben to use male pronouns for Blair White because it just didn't fit the perception.
Yeah.
So this is why I think perception is everything. And when we define what is a man and what is a woman, then it's the actual binary, I think, are the perceptions in our heads, but not of us, crucially. That's where the gender identity idea gets it wrong, but our perception of other people. And we've been doing this for thousands of years. In fact, we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. Other species do it, for goodness sake. You know, my cat was female. She knew the difference between male cats and female cats. She knew nothing about chromosomes or genetics or gender identity, for goodness sake. Nothing. But I suspect if you'd taken a male cat, castrated it at 6 weeks, whatever you do, and then fed this male cat female hormones, so it gave off all the pheromones of being female, etc. I suspect my female cat would have seen that cat as another female cat. And actually, experiments done on this show this. Whether these experiments on animals are ethical or not, I don't know, but we're certainly happy to do them on human beings.
Yeah.
And I think perception is everything, and I think perception is where that binary comes from. Now, years later, we've worked out what actually is one of the drivers behind that, which is that people that we've always called women or men, we've now worked out that the women are those who tend to have, and I use that carefully, tend to have XX chromosomes, because there are some intersex conditions where women can have XY chromosomes.
Yep.
And female genitals and whatever else. And if it hadn't been for the dawn of medical transition after the Second World War, then it would be fine. It would be easy. We'd say, yes, now we know why we define people to be women and men, and always have done, because of biological sex. What transsexuals have done is transsexuals have changed that perception so that we are perceived routinely to be the other sex. We tip the balance, even if we're clocked to be male. If the signals keep pushing it that way, people's instincts override that, or they do in real life. The social media is a totally different ballgame, but in real life, that instinct is crucial. Now, what I think has happened is there's been 2 attempts recently to redefine that instinct and override that instinct. And the transgender activism has come along and said, you must override this human instinct, and you must say this person. You must use pronouns. You must divide people into female and male, men and women, according to how they feel about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the change, and it's not tenable. It won't last. As soon as you stop pushing, that will stop. You know, it's like trying to push a stone uphill. As soon as you stop pushing it, it'll come down and land on you, and that's the future of trans activism.
Yeah.
Then more recently, we've had another push that says, "Oh no! You can't trust your own perceptions of these people. You must look at their chromosomes and their genetics." And if I'm being provocative now, and I get loads of pushback for this, if I'm being provocative, I will say that's trying to redefine the terms men and women as well, but just in a different way. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to take them away from our perception and root them in biological sex. And you can say, well, yes, that's the reason for our perception. Yes, it was, but that perception is crucial. An analogy, and it's interesting. I'm looking at a computer monitor as I'm talking to you. I've got a yellow icon on that on my screen, and that yellow icon, if I look at it, I'm going to call that yellow. And I bet if you came in here and around here and looked at that, you'd call it yellow as well. And I can describe that as yellow, and you understand what it's as yellow, and it's yellow because we perceive it to be yellow, but it's not really. On that screen, there's some red dots and some green dots. So it's not really yellow at all. But we call it yellow because it looks yellow and we interact with it as yellow. So that's what male transsexuals do, in that we change the way that other people perceive us. So in real life, away from the internet, away from Twitter, away from social media, it's just easier to say this is yellow and be done with it. But it's not real. And there's certain situations where that light, as I can see that on there, it's important to know that it's not yellow. Again, coming back to my physics background, if I want to release photoelectrons from a surface, then green photons and red photons act rather differently. And at that point, it really matters whether it's really yellow, monochromatic yellow light, or it's a mixture of red and green. That matters in that situation. But if you're just using it to paint the wall or put on your screen, it doesn't matter at all. So this is where I think we are with how to accommodate transsexuals in everyday life, because if it's the male sex drive that pushes people into transition, I think it is. I don't think this is going away. It's one of those things. If you can do this, it's going to keep happening. So how do you accommodate these people? And to say that you've got to be treated as your birth sex for all purposes just leads to absurdities. It really does. Yes, I don't feel unsafe in the men's at all. I don't feel unsafe in there at all. And I can wander in there. I've got some, just like women can wander into the men's toilets if they and do. It's the situation I've sometimes talked about as women using the men's toilets to avoid a long queue. Women can do that. So I don't feel unsafe in that situation. But if I'm routinely perceived to be the opposite sex, then it just makes everybody feel a bit uncomfortable. And what's actually going on here? So I think in that situation, we need to look at what's happening. But in terms of things like sport, sport is a bit like the release of photoelectrons. That's where some aspects of our sex really matter. So I think in that situation, trans women have no place in women's sport at all. There's other situations which we can look at, but the idea that a transsexual shouldn't present themselves in a way that they feel comfortable with, because that happens to be the same way that women present themselves, so they get perceived to be the opposite sex. I think he's unnecessarily restrictive, and it really is quite conservative, because what you're actually saying is we have a strict set of rules here that men need to present themselves in this way, and women need to present themselves in this way, and nobody should cross that divide. So I've talked quite a lot there about perception and why I think it's important. But I think this is the key to understanding why we are in the mess that we actually are. And that when people say, "What is a woman?" sometimes the best answer is, a woman is a woman and a man is a man. We all know the difference. Just like, what's the difference between happiness and sadness? Well, happiness is happy and sadness is sad. We all know the difference. And that I think is crucial. And what is also crucial is those ideas they are so rooted in us. They are so deep down as human beings. We understand those different emotions of happiness and sadness. Nobody's going to rewrite the law to change those things. You can write, a Happiness Recognition Act as much as you like, and it's just going to be absolutely nonsense. These are enduring and deep set things down in our psyche, and I suspect that other animal species also feel happiness and sadness. They don't have the words to describe them, but they will know that. And the perception of this is a woman and this is a man and this is how I feel about these other people in my society and in my group. I think those are well rooted as well. So that has actually given me a lot more confidence. I used to worry that the law would get written by somebody else to my detriment. I used to worry that the law would get written so that that trans women had to be treated as women in every situation, whatever, because, and I'm thinking that's absurd. But also, I'm seeing a push now in that laws to be written that trans women must be treated as men in all situations because, and I think that's equally that's not going to work either, because human beings are human beings, and what really matters is our feelings, which are deep down, and it's really these ideas and at that gut instinct, which is so far down in our brain. I just don't think there's any chance of changing it at all. I really don't.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's not something that's going away, especially now that we have the medical provisions for it. There's a lot in what you said, and I would agree with most of it. It's a tricky topic to untease because up until, like you said, we had these medical interventions, we didn't really have an issue with this, besides maybe the very spontaneous outlier of an androgynous person. But now we've introduced something that's, constructed through technology that's somehow changing these perceptions, but then it's sort of like the medical industry decided to do this without then considering the ramifications it would have on society, and how now, because those perceptions have changed, what does that mean for women's spaces and stuff like that. And there are people who advocate for protecting women's spaces and sports, and they will make a point of using sex-based pronouns. And I can kind of understand that because they're sort of leading that campaign. But I think they're also of the opinion that we can't use wrong pronouns. So what I mean with that, so she, her, for you, we can't use those because once we do, that means we're inviting them into women's spaces. We're saying, you're a woman, you're allowed to come into our space. But then I'm here kind of thinking, are we not able to know trans people and hopefully one day say, yeah, she, her, but I do know you're male, like I know you're a man, whatever. But it's easier for me to use she, her. And they use the argument of, we're out to dinner, we're calling you she, her all night, then you go into the bathroom, then it's very difficult for me to say why. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, can you not just say you're trans? You should use the disabled toilet. You should use to me, it seems quite simple. But then also, I feel like your position is unusual because you have two sides that are unwilling to let this go. And especially in the case of autogynephilia, that the majority of trans women are either unaware this is the motivation behind their transness, or they really want it to go away. So I sort of wonder, what does the future look like? Because people like yourself are quite rare in terms of accepting your biology, being real with people, and then also just kind of noticing how things play out in the world. Plus, you've acknowledged that just because people might perceive you to be a woman, you still know your place when it comes to women's prisons, sports. I think that's how I understand your position.
Yeah, and I don't use women's toilets either. Yeah. I've not done for several years, and this next sentence might upset people, but I know that I'm not a threat. But and my female friends who know me well know I'm not a threat either. But the problem is, even if I'm not a threat, and you could argue I've been, I've been castrated. In other words, I've been castrated. So that also reduces the risk. But the problem is that if women say yes to me, then it's more difficult for them to say yes to the next transsexual in line who may be a threat. And I think that's important. And I don't want to put women in that position of having to say, yes, we'll decide between these people. So I'll find neutral spaces and I'll do that.
Yeah, and I think just on that point, I think even if most people are okay with it, then you never know when there might be a woman in a changing room who actually has been assaulted in the past and is confronted by a 6-foot trans woman
Yeah.
and suddenly has a really frightening experience and needs to get out of there. So you often won't even hear from those people, right, if they're happening. So that's another important point as well, right?
Yeah, and it is, and I think as transsexuals we need to respect that, and I think it's good that society does offer neutral spaces for people who just don't want to share with their own sex. Communal spaces can be it can be intimidating, and if you just put some separate spaces there, everybody can get on with life. That's what we're trying to do. You asked about the future. I think the future is interesting. What transsexuals have done, transsexuals have forced us to look at what is a man and what is a woman that we wouldn't have done otherwise. Down the line, we've got if we look at what's happening with AI and we look at what's happening with technology, humanoid robots are not now a fantasy of science fiction. We are going to start creating humanoid robots for one purpose or another, and I can see how men may produce humanoid robots in the female form for one purpose anyway. So I can see that happening. If I look back at as a child, I devoured Isaac Asimov's books and his robot stories. And Asimov created robots which were male and female, not ambiguous or neutral robots. Now we're in a situation looking forwards where humanoid robots are no longer the stuff of science fiction. If you look at how far AI has developed in the last 5 years, you just plant those chips, plant that technology into a humanoid robot, and we really are into the land of Black Mirror. Black Mirror was talking about this 10 years ago. So we then develop male robots and female robots because we'll do that. Now, presumably, male robots and female robots won't need to use the toilet, presumably, but they will probably insist that they're dressed in suitable attire. And if those robots are good facsimiles of human beings with genitalia, and there's no reason we wouldn't do this. What happens if the male robot spills paint over his clothes? And I'm using that pronoun there, his, for a
Right.
piece of technology. Robot over his clothes. Which changing room does he use? Does he use the one with the human men, or does he use the one with the human women? Or does he use a separate one? And what about the humanoid robot which is female? So we've in the future we've got an issue here. Do these robots, which presumably aren't any sort of sexual threat at all, but we wouldn't want them changing in the middle of the street because that would be indecent. Where do they change? And these sort of questions, I think will are questions for the future, but probably not too far for the distant future. And we come back to, what do we mean when we use the words man and woman? Because I bet those male humanoid robots will be referred to as men, perhaps robot men, and the female humanoid robots will be referred to perhaps as robot women. And that's what we'll use, because the words men and women, this is what we mean. It means those perceptions. And where the debate goes wrong at the moment is we're just ignoring that, because that's what people actually mean when they use the words man and woman. But what we've had a debate between two groups of people who are both saying this is what the words man and woman ought to mean. So on one side says the words man and woman ought to mean people with male gender identities and people with female gender identities. That's what it ought to mean. And then on the other side of the debate, people are saying the words man and woman ought to mean people with XX chromosomes and XY chromosomes and people with XX chromosomes. And actually, I agree with that. And if you ask me what I think the terms man and woman ought to mean, I agree with that. But at the same time, that's not what people actually mean when they use the terms. What they mean is those common sense ideas. Rishi Sunak talked about common sense. It's just common sense, said Rishi Sunak. And he was right. They refer to those common sense ideas. And if you deny that, then you're never going to get a resolution between two groups who are arguing over what ought to be happening, when I would argue that neither are right in that sense, because
Right.
what's actually happening is something different.
Interesting. I mean, so I would sit on the side of what is a woman? A woman is an adult human female. But then in terms of word choice, I think sometimes those things don't always add up to the definition. So if we ask someone what milk is, they'll say, well, it is, I don't even know how to describe it. Comes out of mammary glands to feed a baby and in mammals, whatever. But then now we have oat milk and almond milk. And then if that's on the counter, I'll say, can you pass me the milk? Now, when it boils down to it, I actually know that's not really milk, but it's easier to use the word.
Yeah.
So I think the definition is still correct. It's just kind of how we use it informally. In the same way that drag queens call each other she, her, but still shouldn't be going into the women's bathroom. But I think that's more socially known. So it's sort of a problem with the social construct around this trans stuff and all the politicization of it, because it's like, you said you had that t-shirt, trans women are men, get over it. And it's a shame that this didn't go down the path of people transitioning and they knew they were men or they knew they were women, but still kind of advocated for stuff like third spaces and sort of people being polite. I think personally that would have gone a lot better. But then now we see people like India Willoughby just on this crusade to force the world to bend it, to bend towards her will of I am a woman and you will never prove that wrong, even though we all know she's wrong. And India, and see, look, I go to call India she, even though I really don't like India. But India also knows that he's a man. So I think coming back to kind of tying this into the autogynephilia, you reference Anne Lawrence, who talks about sort of the correlation with narcissism and that it's a love that would rather not speak its name. So I guess I think a lot of this debate potentially lies on the future of autogynephilia and how men with this can acknowledge it or maybe get treated for it and learn to manage it. Because it seems to me that the reason we have this, vehement denial of reality and want to just make everyone conform to your perception of yourself is rooted in the autogynephilia. And now we have a movement that's also co-opted, universities and the youth. And, it's gone beyond that. Like, I'm not sure if you would agree that that's where it came from originally. But two things here is that, do you think we can get there? And also, what made your story different in terms of being of this ideology or of this typology, but then actually being able to listen to the argument and say, do you know what? You're right. That's what it is.
Well, I think it's just a desperate need to actually try and understand the situation. I've never been happy with explaining things away, to say, oh, well, I'm transsexual because I've got a gender identity. What is this gender identity? How can I define this gender identity? Does other people have a gender identity? What is this? So I'm just not happy about building all my life on things which I can't understand. Sexuality, I do understand. So I was able to actually look for a new foundation for how I'm building my life and how who I think I am, and it's helped me understand myself in so many ways. And that's a blessing. That is, I take that as a blessing itself, to actually understand yourself and what makes you tick, which I didn't when I was clinging on to this idea of gender identity. So I'm happy to do that. I think I'm fortunate in that I have, away from this political debate, I've got a relatively normal life. I work as a teacher, which is quite intense as being a teacher, and there's no room for fantasy there. You're there teaching children physics in order that they will be able to pass the test at the end of the day. That's the plan, and that's really quite intense. I've a business, a separate educational business which I run, advising other schools on curriculum and timetable. I do that. I'm really fortunate that our marriage survived. that's testament to my wife, who wrote the last chapter in the book. I think it's the best.
Yeah,
I
it
think
was beautiful.
it's the best chapter of the lot, if in my opinion, is that. And she wrote it in about 2 hours or 3 hours. She just sat down and wrote it.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I thought, goodness, it took me ages. But it was something which obviously she'd been thinking about, and she sat down and she wrote it. So that's been that's kept me grounded. And although I am active on Twitter, oh dear, it's so easy to get lost in social media and start building your life on Twitter, and this becomes the be all and end all. But there was just too much going on in real life, and it's difficult to keep up with. If you're not careful, you spend hour after hour after hour on there, commenting on everything and sharing this and talking more to people in chat groups who you'd never see than people you live with in real life if you're not careful. And I pulled away from that partly because real life was so important to me and it was calling, but partly because I did start. I did start saying what I think. Well, I've always said what I think, and when you stop saying things that the group expects you to say, then you can rapidly become an unperson and unpopular. And you don't spend many time in chat groups online if the chat groups don't want you. And so I've accepted that, and I don't force myself into anybody's spaces. But it has given me the freedom to explore ideas and to try and explain what's happening, even if it's unpopular. And I think some people need to do that. And I think I think it's important, but I'm not here expecting to suddenly get a huge following of people who think I'm saying all the right things, because I'm not necessarily saying the right things what they want me to say. I'm saying what I think. I think when you say things, when you don't say things that you think people want to hear, but you say things that you think people need to hear, it doesn't necessarily lead to popularity. I know that.
No, but in hindsight, it will be great. I think these kind of ventures, hopefully, they sort of have a long-term payout, because then people can say, "Oh, they were right." And I've experienced the same also in my personal life from lots of people. So it is difficult, but I think it's great. It's great to have voices like yours, especially you being a transsexual. It's so important to have people acknowledging the truth. Just a couple things to kind of close it out. I see also now, I feel like the gender critical argument sort of came from, leave the kids alone, adults can do what they want, and protect women's spaces. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, yeah, cool. Now I see with, the release of the WPATH files and people digging more into the science, is that people are growing of the opinion, oh, actually, there's zero medical evidence for any of this, even in adults. And in history, medical scandals, there's always been a proportion of people who've said that it's made them better, but, we do have the placebo effect, and we don't have the science grounding. So some of them are saying that actually the whole thing is just a mess, never should have been done. From what I can see, there does seem to be people who transition and it does help them. Who knows if that was the only path that their life could have taken, but it's one path. And I suppose I have a bit of a fear towards us going, if the trans activists don't start giving an inch, then we're going to head more that direction. So what's your opinion on that? And these claims that people say that actually this doesn't help anyone, and whoever it does help, they're just sort of experiencing this bizarre placebo.
Well, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? And I certainly don't think that children should be involved in this. I really don't. I think children need to grow up and learn what it's like to be an adult, understand themselves, and I do not think that we should be delaying any child's puberty for because they're distressed about their sex. They've watched too many videos on TikTok or whatever. We should not be doing this. Mm-hmm. Whether you start allowing it at 18, I guess it's the age of majority, and you've got to call it somewhere. But I'm uneasy about that until people really become established as adults, which happens, and has always happened by the time people get to their early to mid 20s. young men do odd things until they get to the mid-20s. You know, it's only
or
then.
longer.
Yeah, but
So,
it's only then when people grow up and become adults. So I know some people are saying 25, and I'd be happy. I'd be happier personally with that. But certainly, it should not be under 18, the age of majority. So I think that. But what about adults? Should adults be allowed to modify their own bodies so they feel more comfortable with them? Now, adults will modify their own bodies for all sorts of reasons. Adults will tattoo their bodies because they want to decorate them. Adults will have all sorts of treatment done as adults. Plastic surgery is a big industry as cosmetic surgery. And if you're going to accept that adults can have certain treatments to change their bodies so that they feel more comfortable with those bodies, then into that comes the autogynephile who wants to change their body because they feel more comfortable with it. But it needs to come after counselling. The key and crucial issue is this going to improve your life? Because if it's not going to improve your life, then it's unethical to do it. How do you know it's going to improve somebody's life? You don't really. But adults certainly need to be aware of the consequences. I sometimes said to me, if I'd known in 2012 what I know now, would I have transitioned? And the answer is no, I wouldn't have done. I thought I transitioned because I thought I was some kind of woman. That gave me license to transition, and so I went ahead with it. If I'd known the truth about the fact it was autogynephilia, it was short circuiting of my male sexuality, then I wouldn't have transitioned. So because that didn't give me that wouldn't have given me the license in my head to do that. So now, should I detransition, Debbie? You say you want to transition in the first place. So surely, Debbie, you should detransition now. And I think, well, what does it actually mean to detransition? Because I quite like having my hair long. When I was a child, I always wanted to grow my hair out, but it was not the sort of thing that boys did. So I quite like having my hair long. So I want to keep my hair long. I'm having no more surgery. I'm not. And there's parts of my upper body which no longer resemble a man's. So I more fit female cut tops now, although I struggle with my hips. I sometimes, jeans are a problem because I've got male hips but female thighs.
right.
So I struggle with jeans. But that's beside the point. But should I detransition? And I could, but I'd be less satisfied with what I transitioned into, because ultimately, the reason why I changed my body was because I'm more satisfied with it. I'm more comfortable with it now. So why go from something I'm more comfortable with to something I'm less comfortable with that might involve quite more intensive, invasive surgery, which I don't want.
Yeah.
So why do that? So that's where I am at the moment. But I
And
am.
and just on, so you saying if you'd known at the time you wouldn't have done it, but does that mean then that you could potentially just have continued having this distress all the
I
time?
don't. I don't know. I don't know. There was
Right.
one treatment which was available at the time, which was just to give a low dose of estrogen, which was too low to cause feminization of the body, but did actually suppress testosterone. The brain just gets confused, and the extra estrogen then suppresses the testosterone, and that does make it livable with, I guess. But perhaps I'm talking now that my testosterone levels, which were well at the top or even above the male range. I was quite proud of them when I did my baseline testosterone test, and I
Right.
was quite proud of them actually. I was a real he-man in terms of the testosterone, and the idea that I just needed a boost of hormones to sort me out was nonsense. But I'm saying this now when my hormone levels my testosterone level is way down on the level where it's
Yeah.
typically female level, if not lower, because I've no ovaries to produce testosterone either. Uh, so it's perhaps easier for me to say. if I'd had the testosterone, which was really, it has that driving, impetus on men that I just don't think, it's hard. It's hard to explain to somebody who has never experienced it.
I understand, don't worry. You'll see a lot of that in the gay world.
Yeah.
And well, I suppose, obviously going back to the idea of it being this sexual attraction in words, but then even after plummeting your testosterone and getting, bottom surgery, lots of these trans women still want to live in this kind of identity and presentation. So surely it goes beyond merely sexual attraction. It's I don't know, would you call it a romantic kind of connection
Yeah,
as
well,
well? Or
this was Anne Lawrence. Ray Blanchard came up with the idea of it being that almost that introverted sexual attraction to ourselves. Anne Lawrence extended it and talked about a romantic. It's not purely erotic; it's also romantic.
yeah,
So it's much wider, and we make ourselves. I think we make ourselves sexually attractive to other people because at the same time we're more comfortable with our bodies. That we're more comfortable doing that. We're more confident that way, and I think those two things are tied together.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah,
trans woman now, I present in a way which is typical of women of my age, I guess. It's certainly more typical of women than it is of men because presenting this way makes me feel confident. It makes me feel comfortable, and I quite like myself presenting this way.
yeah,
And whether that's I can't speak for women because I'm not a woman, but whether the same sort of feelings, whether the same sort of emotions go through a woman's mind as it does through mine, I don't know. But I'm certainly not engaged in some sort of 24/7 sexual fetish with myself. Goodness gracious, I'd be exhausted.
yeah.
That's not happening.
Well, yeah, I certainly don't feel that way talking to you.
Yeah.
So I guess my last question is just, so as a gay man, I would obviously feel quite protective of the future gay people and what kind of experience they'll have and wanting them to be happy and accepted. But this phenomenon of autogynephilia obviously causes a lot of suffering and distress, and sometimes a lot of men living with it and perhaps never telling anyone. But is there anything you can foresee in the future for what you'd like to see to, for some of these men to possibly have more support or help in managing this?
I think somebody needs to support them because there's two groups. One who just denies that autogynephilia is actually happening. The autogynephilia is not real. So that group, and the other one that says autogynephilia is something which is deviant behavior, which should be which should be sent away.
Shamed.
You're shamed and sent away. But
Yeah.
that doesn't help.
Doesn't work.
What we need is this is actually going on. Yes, it's unusual. It's different to other people, but we need to understand this, and to help men who are struggling with to understand what they're actually going through, and to either live with it. I lived with it for 44 years actually, and if it hadn't been the fact that I said I transitioned because I thought I was some kind of woman, but it was only really because the availability of it was there that I transitioned. If it wasn't available, then you can't do it. This stuff stays in your dreams, but it is there. So men are going to transition and keep transitioning. But for goodness sake, we need to help them understand why they're doing it, who they are, and how this fits best into society. Because what's happened in the past where you make it go away by saying, oh, we'll just treat you in the same way as women in all situations. I don't think that's tenable. I don't think it was ever really tenable. It might have been when there was a tiny number and the barriers to entry were huge. Whereas now the barriers to entry are not huge, and we know that. So things have changed. So we can't say we'll treat you in the same way as women for all purposes. But also, I don't think it's workable to say we'll treat you in the same way as men for all purposes. I just don't think I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to be trying to push the stone uphill on the other side of the valley, and then when you stop pushing, it'll come back down. The fact is that perception matters. Yeah, sex matters. Sex matters absolutely.
You can start a new organization called Perception Matters.
But perception certainly matters. But for goodness sake, we need to understand. We need to understand this condition without shaming it.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, Debbie, thank you so much. Where can people go find your book? I know you said the paperback is coming out soon.
Yeah, my book's available from all good booksellers as they do, as you do. So yes, it's available in hardback. It's available on Kindle, and there's an audio book, and the paperback's due out at the end of August, which is a little bit cheaper and a little bit more compact. But it's the same book.
How's the response been?
The response has been interesting. It's been good, but it's been interesting. The response that's come back. What I've really valued are the private messages from individuals who have said things like, "I now understand what makes me tick," and I had a lovely message from a woman who said, "My father struggled with this throughout his life. You know, he's dead." Dead now. He struggled with this throughout his life, and only now do I actually understand what he was struggling with. And that's the market I was aiming at, for people who want to understand what's going on, and it's been well received there. The issue is that within public social media, people are more reluctant to say what you've done. Say, I've read your book and I've enjoyed bits of it, because there's two sides to this debate, and both sides dislike my book for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. I'm going to bring this episode out and promote it more, so I don't care what either side say. Well, that really touches me to know that you're getting those messages, and I certainly thought that reading it. I hope that people see themselves in this experience, whether that's from your side or another side. And yeah, thank you so much for writing that. Really enjoyed it. And yes, hopefully we'll talk again.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jack.